All right, perfect. Well, then we will get things started. Thank you very much for joining us. I am James Sawyer. On this panel, we have Kelsey Epps from Bitdefender. We're going to be talking about bringing your productivity to the cloud so that you can be at work wherever, whenever. So, as we know, the evolution of working remotely has changed dynamically this year, specifically around COVID. Traditionally, when people were working from home, they had to connect to an on-premise work infrastructure. Um, and in order to do that, they might have some sort of complex setups, VPN connections, things like that, in order to stay productive and also stay secure. Nowadays, with the majority of the workforce either working from home or remotely, being on the go, that's changed the dynamics of things. So now, instead of being the exception, working remotely has almost become the rule. So, in order to get the kind of productivity and security that you need, people are going towards more cloud-based services like Office 365. And in order to do so, you need to find a way to lift your actual productivity environment from those traditional on-premise environments and put them into the cloud and then implement specific security. So the first step really that anyone's going to have to go to is actually just getting your stuff in the cloud. And that can be a big challenge for a lot of people. Often people worry about downtime or security of the transfer of the data or how complicated it will be to set things up for the end users post migration. These are all things that we've been dealing with for years here at ShareWeb to onboard our clients and get them onto the cloud as efficiently and securely as possible. I myself used to work in our migration team. I was one of the first members. So I've been there since the beginning when we first started working when BitTitan only had Migration Wiz. It was their only specific license, and we were only migrating mailboxes. And nowadays we've evolved to be able to migrate OneDrive, SharePoint, some specific Teams data, and more stuff is coming, and more ways to migrate have evolved over time. So now that we live in pretty much 100% cloud world, you need to find a way to help your customers adapt. So you need to ensure that the current climate means countless businesses must rely on cloud services. You have no choice. Uh, with all lockdowns and potential more lockdowns happening based off of how things are going to go, this is going to be the new reality. Um, and when you need to move, you're going to need to move as quickly as possible. People can't afford anymore to take weeks or months to make the decision to go to the cloud because it impacts your everyday business. You need to find experts that can help you to get from your on-premise into these cloud environments, but also ensure that it's done efficiently and with security in mind, and that you have a good business continuity going forward. So the companies that survive this and win are the ones are those who exhibit digital dexterity. You need to help your customers survive. This is a huge challenge that not just you, but all businesses are facing. And you can do it. We've been doing it for years. It's just now it's really coming to the forefront and a big need moving forward. So as you can see, advantages of the cloud, they're most cost effective because instead of buying hardware and equipment, it's all software as a service. You're just paying monthly fees for the specific services that you need, and everything's hosted in a mega environment, usually with redundancies and higher availability, quicker patches and updates on the back end because that's being handled outside. You don't have to worry about downtime because you don't have to put a server offline to do specific patches or updates. These are all things that are being handled in the back end for you. So that operational expense is no longer there. You can rely on the stability of those services that have been there for years and years, and the technicians and people like ShareWeb that can help guide you towards being successful with those specific platforms and services that we're able to offer you. Now, what kind of services do you need in the cloud? Well, it really depends. First and foremost, that we see is email. So we offer Microsoft 365, Hosted Exchange, G Suite. File servers. People are used to having file servers that are now being converted more into SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Docs, and even Azure files. Backup. People need to back up their stuff, not just locally, but even in the cloud. People prefer having some sort of backup. So things like Acronis or Veeam Cloud Connect can back up local infrastructure, but also back up Office 365 products. So keeping all of your items secure and backed up is ideal, and it can all be handled from one provider. Management and control. With Office 365, you have Azure AD Premium, the Endpoint Manager, which is previously known as Intune, and Azure Information Protection DLP policies that can help protect private data. A lot of people in medical verticals require specific DLP policies or encryption or things like that. So there are services that we offer that include those type of things to ensure the continuity of your business and that you're meeting the compliance requirements necessary. And last, and probably the most important, is security. Things like Bitdefender for your actual hardware, machines, and whatnot. Proofpoint for specifically for mail. If you're not comfortable with the Office 365 licensing that does encryption and archiving and things like that, you can use Proofpoint to handle those kind of things. Malware. A big threat of malware and spear phishing happens. Office 365's advanced threat protection can help against that because it'll scan emails, it will scan attachments, scan links for any kind of fishy things and block that for you. And of course, Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which pretty much just takes the basic Windows Defender antivirus and pumps it up to an enterprise level situation so that you can use that. And if used in tandem with other things like Endpoint Manager, you can push out deployments and updates and stuff like that through there as well. So how do we help you at SureWeb? Well, we have a bunch of account managers that get assigned that can help point you to the right services for your needs. They'll talk with you, find out what you're actually using right now, and try to match you up with cloud services that meet or exceed your current needs, can help you grow for the future. There might be products available that can help you do things in a more efficient way that you're just not aware of. So the first step is speaking to them so that they can help figure out where you need to go and how to move forward to be able to take full advantage of everything the cloud has to offer. Um, they can arrange consultations with pre-sales or SMEs. If you have more technical needs or need something specific, we have resources internally that we can bring onto a call with you and fully discuss technical needs, help to architect or build out a plan of the services that you need, or if you need a specific type of migration, figure out how we can get you on board as quickly and easily with as little headaches or caveats as possible. We also offer quick and easy activation of services. Usually you'll have access to a cloud portal that you can log into. You choose the amount of services required. Within minutes, usually the service is up and running. In some cases, there could be a manual provisioning that takes a little bit longer to take care of. But 9 times out of 10, when you pop in, you just turn on a service within minutes, you're able to access that service and start using it right away. And of course, our migration assistance. It's available for many different platforms with multiple different service offerings. So when we talk about migration, we talk about migration options. Now, normally there are 3 types of migrations that we talk about for most platforms. There is the cutover, there's a stage scenario, and if you have an on-premise Exchange server, there's ideally 2013 or higher. You can do what they call a hybrid migration, where you're kind of half on-premise and half in the cloud. It can be used for permanent coexistence, or it can be used for temporary coexistence while you're migrating onto the new platform. So for a cutover, this is the suggested method for migration that we normally use. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. It might hurt for a second, but then it's all over and business is back to usual. In our experience, it's the most effective method because all users are either on one side or the other. And so when it comes to troubleshooting or diagnosis, it's a lot easier to figure out what's going on. Now, we do often hear common concerns like they can't afford downtime, or the users are in different offices, or they can't configure their own products. Normally, we would just advise that there's no real downtime. You'll always have access to your emails. The location should not be a concern because the service will always be cloud-based and accessible via OWA, worst case scenario. Clear communication with the staff about the change will ensure that the end users themselves are prepared for that change. We usually provide some sort of documentation to help them to be able to do stuff on their own. Also, in some cases, depending on the platform you're migrating to, there may be a tool to help set up Outlook profiles that that can avoid some of that extra headaches. I believe part of one of the licenses that we use, there's a component called Deployment Pro that will actually reconfigure your Outlook profile and point it directly to Office 365. And that can be deployed at the end user level, or even you could deploy it via GPO across a network. So it's very, very handy to use that kind of situation. The next step, the next type of migration is staged. So a stage is a bit more complicated. It's a great idea on paper, but as you can see based off of the image that I chose, it can be complicated because in order to get things to work back and forth and cross-share, certain things just don't work. Like you can't share mail folders or mailboxes. In order to ensure that the mail flow works between two platforms, we need to create proxy addresses using a domain that won't exist on the new platform so that you can create forwards back and forth. So there's a lot of extra PowerShell scripts run to do these kind of activities. If you're moving from, say, a hosted Exchange environment or any Exchange environment to Office 365 or a hosted Exchange environment, well, one of the main record types that you use for helping to configure and have things like FreeBusy and sharing stuff work is auto-discover. So when you have people on two different platforms, you end up having to create a host file entry to point to a specific auto-discover of users so that it kind of bypasses the actual DNS entry to ensure that you're pointing to the right server. So all those extra steps and things that have to be done locally are a lot more difficult. And again, troubleshooting between two different environments at the same time can become a bit of a nightmare because you don't know where the issue is coming from. Is it coming from the source or the destination? So as much as possible, we try to avoid this type of scenario. Again, cutover is our specific preference for the majority of cases because it's simple. It's one side or the other, rip off the Band-Aid. Lastly, there's the hybrid. As explained earlier, it was initially created more for a long-term coexistence between on-premise servers and Office 365 so that you could have maybe some power users in the cloud and some of them still on-prem. Or if you were going to migrate thousands of users over a period of several months, you might need this kind of scenario so that you could do people by groups. Now, the caveats of them are they don't really work from hosted Exchange environments or any kind of multi-tenant type of environments because it would display private information of other clients. So if we're moving you from one of those environments, we can't even use that scenario. Exchange needs to be set up following all Microsoft's recommended guidelines. A lot of times people on-prem are building their own servers their own way or deciding maybe this update's not important. I don't need to put this update in place. And that can cause connection issues when you're trying to set up something like a hybrid. The advantages of the hybrid are that you can create batches of users based off of the global address list, and you can select which ones to remotely move from one environment to the other. Another advantage too, kind of like the Deployment Pro, is it will automatically readjust Outlook profiles for the end user. So there's less user end setup that has to be done. But again, it's complex to troubleshoot because you're talking about two different environments. Usually the MX records are still pointed to your hosted Exchange, and it's really just connectors on the back end that are shipping stuff over to 365 until everybody's moved on to that new platform. So it really becomes a question of how much time do you have to put into troubleshooting those kind of issues, especially if they haven't set up all of their servers based off of the norms of Microsoft and the suggestions of Microsoft. So again, we point you more back towards the cutover as the ideal method, but there are alternatives that we can offer based upon your specific needs. Just know that there are certain challenges and limitations if we go down one of those other routes. So when we're talking about a migration for mail specifically, there are certain supported platforms that we know about and that we fully can offer help with. Um, Again, using the BitTitan tools specifically for mailboxes, usually the migration whiz portion, we can migrate you to or from Office 365, Exchange 2003 Plus, G Suite, Lotus Notes 6.5 Plus, Zimbra 6 Plus, GroupWise 7 Plus. We can also do IMAP. However, it is just mail and including any subfolders. We can also migrate POP, but it's really the inbox only. So if you've created any kind of subfolders, those don't come across. And most of the time, people that have set up a POP are pulling information off the server. It's usually a small mailbox, and their Outlook is containing all of the data in a PST. So 9 times out of 10 in an IMAP or a POP situation, we do, depending of course on the amount of users and any kind of policies on the server, we usually would suggest in those scenarios that a manual migration where you just export a PST from Outlook and then import it into the new profile is the preferred method. But for all those other types, I mean, especially specifically some of those trickier ones like Lotus Notes and Zimbra, strongly suggest going with the migration whiz. They've done a fantastic job in creating tools that can allow us to connect and bring across the bulk of data. There's tons of different types of things that come across. Of course, there are some things that don't as well, but you can easily find a list of what is and isn't migrated on their website. So again, when we talk about migration tools, there are lots of them out there, but our preference really is to go with Migration Wiz. We've been using them for so long, I can't even remember. I've been with SureWeb for 10 years. When I was with the team, we were using it at the beginning and we're still using it today. I'm a firm believer of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's not broken. You know, it's been doing everything we need it to do. We've been getting all the support that we require from the team. And we have Kelsey on the line with us right now just to talk a little bit about BitTitan and their products. So we've got a few slides coming up. I'll let Kelsey take it away. So Kelsey.
Perfect. Thanks, James. A little bit about myself. My name is Kelsey Epps. I'm one of the senior technology sales specialists that works at BitTitan. A little bit about my background. I was a 5-time Microsoft MVP for Office 365. So I was one of the first 2 MVPs in Canada, given that designation by Microsoft, and one of the top or one of the first 8 in North America. Previous to coming to BitTitan, I worked at HPE or HP for about 15 years and worked in their Office 365 offering near the end there as a delivery manager for that. So a little bit about BitTitan. We were one of those kind of born in the cloud companies. We've been around, approximately 11 years now. And the product migration whiz, which James had talked about there, really started with Microsoft's first offering into Office 365, which used to be called BPOS, and migrating mailboxes from Exchange and hosted Exchange into BPOS. So since in that 11 years, we've kind of grown our customer base. So we're at about 43,000 customers. We've serviced about 19 million users, and of those 19 million users, about 187 countries. Some really cool things about Migration Wiz, and which a lot of our customers really like, is that Migration Wiz runs in Microsoft Azure. It's a SaaS offering, so there's nothing to install on premise. It's a very simple UI to use, and it really powers the migrations that a lot of those migrations that James had talked about there. So, like I mentioned, we started with mailbox migration, so we can migrate mail to Office 365 into G Suite. And then we added subsequent services along there as things started moving more and more to the cloud. We saw obviously more and more need to migrate more than just mail. So we can migrate documents either to OneDrive, SharePoint, Google Drive. We can do those personal archives, so we can do those PST files, those Exchange archive mailboxes, Office 365 archive mailboxes, and we can also extract data out of Google Vault. And also, as James had alluded to there, with some of those issues that they were running into, or that most of our customers are running into with remote Outlook profile configurations, we have a tool that's called Deployment Pro. It's a simple tool, it installs on the desktop, it's configurable and controllable through our UI on our web page. And basically what that does is it's going to remotely configure or reconfigure Outlook profiles for you. So during those migrations where you can't run desk to desk and create those Outlook profiles for users, this tool will do it on behalf of you. And James had kind of mentioned the issue with auto discover. So yes, Deployment Pro, what it does is it basically bypasses DNS for auto discover, and it'll use its value that you set in on the tool. And then we've recently released Microsoft Teams to Teams migration as well, so enabling some of those tenant to tenant migrations.
Exactly. The teams to teams is somewhat new for us to be running, but we've run quite a few successfully. Uh, it does a lot of the team related stuff, but keep in mind it's still a new tool and there's still things in Teams that are connected in weird ways. So there are some specific things. One that comes across the top of my head is personal chats. Unfortunately, don't come through, but your Teams chats do. So any information in the actual team tab of Teams, that information does come through.
Yeah, that's correct, and it is a newer offering, and with BitTitan we use kind of like an agile dev cycle, so we're constantly making updates and enhancements and modifications to the tool sets as well.
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of a lot of change to that product since it first came out to now, and I think it's doing fantastic work, and I'm sure in the future it'll be able to handle even more.
Mhm. Yes, perfect. Yeah, if you want to just flip on to the next slide there, perfect. So some of the top questions that we get is that why do we need an automation tool? So we consider Migration Wiz an automated tool because once it's set up and configured and you put your source mailbox in, a destination mailbox, or source, data document source, and your destination data. So if you're going from like Google Drive to OneDrive, or on-premise, document share to OneDrive. Once we set that stuff up, then it's literally just a click, and then everything, all the magic kind of happens in the background. So we really, obviously we're a migration company, so we really try to steer people away from manual migrations. And the reasons for those is not just for our benefit, but obviously we like to see our customers successful and we like to see them happy. And most of that time is when their projects run smoothly. And the feedback that we've gotten from our customers is that introducing Migration Wiz into their migration projects really makes their migrations go a lot smoother. So it's some of the top roadblocks that a lot of our partners face in migration projects are just a lot of that complexity. And I know that James had mentioned to that, but Migration Wiz takes a lot of the migration complexity out of it with that simple setup and then that automated background. The customer downtime is another big one. So if you're manually migrating mail, for instance, then there can be some customer downtime. With Migration Wiz, basically is that we can pre-stage the mailbox in the background and we don't make any changes to the source. So all we're ever doing is reading from the source environment. So the users are happily working away on their source environment while their data is being migrated in the background. And then the cutover is just that momentary blip where you actually have to physically cut over from one mail system or one document system to the destination. And then Migration Wiz is happily running in the background. They're migrating their documents or their email data. Data loss is another big one because with Migration Wiz, it is automated in the background. We know we're going to go in there, we're going to migrate the complete contents of the mailbox. Whereas if you're doing a manual method, you could miss some data. Maybe that data is really important. And then once the source environment has gone away, you no longer have access to that data. So with Migration Wiz, you have the assurance that it's back there. And another big one is the lack of kind of technical expertise. So unless you're working with a partner like SureWeb to actually do the migration for you or alongside you, most people would have a problems doing those migrations. Some of the issues, running into free tools. So free tools typically don't have the support or the scale, and it can't handle those kind of complex scenarios. So, you know, working with SureWeb and BitTitan, I mean, we have a 24/7, 365 support team that'll back you up for your migrations. And not only just, you know, with the migrations, we have our help center, which has guides and everything to help you walk through those migrations as well. And then, you know, we've seen it all from the, you know, 1 or 2 mailbox migrations all the way up to the multi-thousands, you know, 50 or 100,000 mailboxes being migrated at a time. So we can handle those simple migrations as well as those highly complex migrations as well.
Exactly. I remember even back in the day when I was part of the migration team, one of the more complicated ones that I faced was a Lotus Notes migration for about 500 users. And it took a few months to accomplish, and we had to kind of do it in a staged fashion. But honestly, like when we were done, the client was super impressed, and it was all due to us being able to use Migration Wiz to connect to the server and bring things across. There were challenges, of course, but it helped them realize that potential.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the kind of feedback that we get all the time as well, is that, you know, we like to try and make things a little easier for our customers and make sure that things run really smooth. So as James had mentioned in his previous slides there about the different types of migrations, you know, the cutover, the stage, the hybrid. I mean, hybrid is a great migration, but it's got some fairly intensive setup on the front end. You know, that you don't just run a hybrid migration. You have to, you know, make sure your AD is aligned before you do an AD sync. You have to, you know, get certificates. There's a lot of complex setup that has to happen before a hybrid migration happens. So maybe the team in front that's doing the migration, you know, can run in there and set up migration was easier and do a cutover migration, and you know, rather than a hybrid migration. That being said, I
Exactly. I
mean,
mean,
yeah, as I
a
say, that
lot of
being
the
said,
times in,
yeah, we do
sorry,
support
go ahead.
hybrid migrations as well. So you can manage those hybrid migrations with Migration Wiz as well. And
Exactly.
typically on the native migration tool front from Microsoft, it's just they're very feature limited. You know, doing IMAP, there's not very much that you can migrate with IMAP, um, and the supportability of it as well. So, I mean, if you're doing a native Microsoft migration, then it's very hard to get support on that. So, you know, where with us, I mean, you're fully backed 24/7, 365. There's no extra cost for support. It's built into the price of the tool.
Perfect.
So I know I kind of talked about these already, but let's hit the slide anyways. So why
Yeah.
Migration Wiz? So definitely easy to use. I mean, we're 100% SaaS. There's no special training. There's no installations. No professional services typically required, and one simple UI for all the workloads. So if you ever seen a
Oh yeah,
screenshot
that
of
UI is
Migration Wiz,
really clean. It's really clean and really easy to use. I really dig it.
yeah, and like I mentioned before, it's all SaaS based, lives in Azure, runs in Azure. We have instances running around the world. We have our main commercial instance, and we have a couple other instances up and running for different customers. But within Migration Wiz, you can select where you want to process your data. So obviously, being Canadian, we were kind of sensitive about our data as well. So in the BitTitan console, you can select the data center of Canada, and what it'll do is it'll process the data. So the physical data that we're actually moving is being kept in the Azure data centers within Canada.
And
As
as you can
fast
see in the
as
secure and compliance slide, it never stores data. It's just in transit through that data center.
Yeah, that's correct. So fast and scalable. So one of the kind of magic things about Migration Wiz is that you don't have to request any like um, more migration servers or anything like that. You basically put all your mailboxes in or all your document sources in, select them all, and click Start Migration. And we have calculations on our back end, and our back end is automated where it's going to know how many migrations it's trying to handle. And then when we kind of exceed a threshold on our side, we're going to automatically spin up more migration servers in the background and then dynamically transfer the load across. So we're not going to be the bottleneck in your migration. And that seems like a process that would take, you know, a long time, but it really doesn't. I mean, we can spin up servers and transfer the migrations around very quickly. And most of the times our customers don't even realize that that's happening in the background because their data is just migrating. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
Under the
anytime I've ever seen a bottleneck, it's always been either at the source or the destination.
Yeah, and typically moving data into Office 365 or G Suite, we typically see the bottlenecks at the source environment. So, small business, running a small business server on premise or running Exchange server
Mhm.
on premise, we're typically limited by bandwidth. But we can work around that. We can pre-stage data. We can do a lot of different things
Yeah,
to
limit
kind of.
connections. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, for sure. It's secure and compliant. So the data is encrypted at rest and in transit through the Azure data centers. And then obviously I mentioned that the regional processing is available. So, if you select the Canadian data center, we're going to keep your data in Canada. And we never store any of the user data. So it's one of the awesome things about Migration Wiz is that what it does is it'll connect to the source, it'll grab a set number of item, it'll momentarily cache it on our migration server until we know that it's written from the destination, and then it's gone. So we don't ever think, we don't like we don't go in there, we don't copy your whole mailbox, store it, and then make the connection to the destination. So it's kind of a real active migration in that sense. And we always use the native protocols as well. So it's the same protocols that you're connecting to Office 365 with right now. Those are the same protocols that we're using in the background, or we're using secure APIs on the Microsoft side of things to transfer data into Microsoft. And then, yeah, enterprise reliability, as I mentioned before, is that what we do is we've done migrations, all the way down to one mailbox, up to the hundred thousands of mailboxes at a time. So we do have enterprise reliability. We support the migrations no matter what the seat count is or what the business or what the complexity of the migration is. So we handle, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, that sort of thing as well. So how do we license BitTitan? So our simplest license is just the mailbox license, and that's just a standalone mailbox. So you're just moving your mailbox, it's a single license. Our most popular is the bundle. And this is kind of what really ties into the topic of this webinar is shifting those workloads to the cloud and Office 365 in particular. So with the user migration bundle, you're going to be able to migrate your mailbox. You're going to be able to migrate your documents, your personal archive. So personal archive would be like a PST file or Exchange archive mailbox. And then it also comes with the Outlook configuration portion, so Deployment Pro.
just to
Uh,
clarify that too, because I know that we can migrate to other sources like Exchange or G Suite. That Outlook configuration is specifically for Office 365.
yeah, correct. Specifically for Office 365.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of migrations that I've seen and handled, that's the direction that most people are going. But I just wanted to make sure that that precision was made because, unfortunately, if you're going to use G Suite with Outlook, you can, but that's going to be more manual. It
Yeah,
will not work that way. But I mean, if you're
yeah.
going G Suite, you should be using the cloud interface because that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, anybody that's tried to run Outlook for G Suite, there's multiple limitations. And really,
Yeah,
Outlook was built for Exchange and Office
exactly.
365. So, yeah, perfect. And then we also have some tag-on licenses, which we're seeing more and more, specifically on tenant-to-tenant migrations. So we have our collaboration license, which really allows that Microsoft Teams migration tenant-to-tenant. So we'll migrate the teams, the channels, the conversations, the permissions, and then the underlying files with that. And then for those of us that have to run into public folders, we also support those as well. So public folder migrations, as well as shared mailboxes.
Perfect, perfect. So this kind of leads into our migration phases, the way that SureWeb specifically will work to put together a migration with you and how we would run it. Now, of course, most of the time using the Migration Wiz or the user migration bundle from BitTitan to help facilitate the transfer of that data. So it's done in about 4 phases. First is the preparation. This is where we replicate the users, distribution lists, and all of that stuff on the new platform. There's multiple ways it could happen depending on the to and the from. But that's the main phase is just to make sure we have the containers that we're going to be moving the data from point A to point B. Next, we do what we call a pre-migration. So this is just a copy of historical data, usually anything older than 30 days, because we find most people are really modifying their most recent stuff more often than not. People don't always take a lot of time to clean up old historical stuff. They've already sorted it into subfolders or have rules that have taken care of stuff like that. So in so doing, we're going to limit the amount of time it'll take to transfer the last bit of data in the following phase, which we would call the cutover. So we just do a delta pass to bring up the most current data. Most of the time, this phase completes within about an hour because there's not so much data to transfer. But again, really depends on the amount of users and the actual change rate, how much data you've had in the last 30 days. But 9 times out of 10, about an hour or so, that cutover period where we bring that last bit of data is done and people start using the new services. Now, at that point, a lot of the time, because some of that data is still being transferred, we normally suggest that end users rely more on OWA temporarily to see their latest and respond to the most latest emails. Because once the MX records have pointed to that new platform, all new mails going there. But as Outlook is rebuilding its profile, it sometimes will be downloading information from the server and not be fully up to date and pulling out your new stuff while it's doing that stuff in the background. Now, the Deployment Pro helps in that regard because it modifies the actual existing profile instead of creating a brand new one. But in some cases, if you've created a brand new Outlook profile, in that case, it does need to recache data. So there is a certain period of time where Outlook could not have the most recent information. So strongly suggest using OWA for that window of time to ensure. And that's how you can also ensure no downtime because you always have access to your latest and greatest. You just log into that portal and you can use that at least temporarily until you're sure Outlook or mobile devices are fully synchronized with the change. The final phase that we usually go through is what we call post-migration. So our migration technicians will reach out to you, make sure everything's set up to your satisfaction. If you have any final questions, if there's certain things that weren't covered. I mean, normally we provide you as much documentation as needed based on your specific need. So if you say, hey, I have printers and whatnot, how do I set that up? We will send you that documentation. If you have people that you're using non-standard clients like Thunderbird instead of Outlook, we'll send you how to create an IMAP setup in that kind of client as well. Granted, a lot of the stuff will likely come directly from Microsoft because it is most of the time you'll be moving towards the Microsoft 365 sphere. But instead of having to go and search for that stuff, we can compile all that and provide that to you, and you can send that out to your end users. So based off of this process that we put into place and we've been running for years and years and years, the average migration will take about 7 to 10 business days. So that can be anything from, say, 10 users to 2,000 users. Of course, like I said, each migration is different and there are a lot of factors that could impact that, but 9 times out of 10, within 7 to 10 business days, a complete migration of your core productivity data can be completed, and you could be up and running on that new platform within that window of time. And ideally within the first 48 hours, once it's been running for about 48 hours, we have a better idea of the speed and how quickly some have completed. We can give a better estimate at that point. But the standard that we would normally say is about 7 to 10 days. So the main keys to success when we're talking about migration is planning. You need to know who does what and when. Now, when you're working with SureWeb, you will have a specific migration technician that will be your point of contact. If ever they go on vacation or they're absent, one of their teammates will be tagged onto that case so that if you do need to reach someone, you can. Timing. Specific timelines need to be agreed and adhered to, because if you're telling everybody, okay, we're going to cut over at 5 p.m. on Friday, but some of your end users aren't in the know, they might still be trying to use the old services while everybody else is on the new, and it's not going to function properly, or we might need to run another pass to grab some of the sent items they still sent from the old platform. So timing is a key factor as well. And that brings me to the most important of all, is communication. Having open communication with the users and your technician will ensure that everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what's going on, that you feel comfortable and confident that you can reach someone when you need them. So if those 3 factors come into play, then you're guaranteed success when it comes to a migration. And that leads us to the Q&A section. So Alex, if you can check with the audience, see if we have any kind of questions, that would be great.
Sure, James. Let me just check right here. We do have a question here. So can you describe how Migration Wiz complies with Canadian data sovereignty requirements?
I'll toss that to Kelsey.
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of touched a bit upon this in my presentation, but it all goes down to how Migration Wiz is built and where it runs. So it runs in Azure, and the data that we do process, we can process in Canada. So we can make sure that your data stays in Canada. And it also comes down to basically how we migrate that data, and it comes down to using the native protocols or APIs to migrate that data. So we'll process your data in Canada, and we'll process it securely and encrypted using the native protocols and APIs.
Perfect. Thanks, Kelsey. Anything else, Alex?
I'm not seeing anything on my end. Maybe whoever's online, if you guys have any questions, feel free.
And if there are no questions, that means I did my job very, very well.
I have a question for you, James.
Sure.
What's the typical size that you guys are seeing for companies that are now shifting their workloads into Office 365? And follow-up
Well,
question is, which workloads are you seeing? Predominantly mail, but what other workloads?
well, I mean, honestly, we've been seeing a lot of tenant to tenant type of migrations lately because there's places like GoDaddy, the syndicated, that are no longer offering service or their customer service is not satisfactory to the end
Okay.
users. So we're seeing, like you were talking about, OneDrive to OneDrive, 10 or Teams to Teams type of migrations. Um, Mail is a big core, but again, everything, well, I won't say everything, but 90% of what we migrate is towards Office 365. Of that, probably about 80% is mail and 20 is mixture of documents and SharePoint. So mail is still the principal core, and people really need access to their emails to function for business. So we definitely, that is our focal point. But we have seen more and more OneDrive migrations and Teams migrations, especially when it comes to changing platforms. I mean, even the Drive stuff we do from, I've seen a lot of Google to Office 365. So we've been seeing a lot of Google Drive to OneDrive migrations as well. So those are really the workloads we see. And typical size, we see a lot of medium to small businesses. So we'll see a lot of like 20 to 60 user accounts. And at least a couple times a month, we'll get a couple hundred, almost bordering on enterprise level clients that are shifting as well. So we get a nice mix, but most of it is really medium to small businesses because they, in this specific time, they really need to be running anywhere, and they've had to change a lot. I think a lot of the larger enterprise level entities already had a lot of stuff in place where even on-prem, remember the first slide where I was talking about how it was the exception and now it's the rule. Well, a lot of those bigger companies, because they had those exceptions, had the infrastructure in place where they could allow users to remote in and stuff, and a lot of the smaller places didn't. It was like you had to be in the office in order for it to work. And so those are the ones that we're seeing the most because they don't want to have to be reliant on an on-premise environment anymore. They want their users to be able to work anywhere.
Yeah, I think that pretty closely aligns with what we're seeing as well. Are you guys seeing a lot of cloud platform to cloud platform migrations? So people shifting from Microsoft to Google or Google to Microsoft?
Mostly Google to Microsoft. I maybe have seen a handful from Microsoft to Google, and those have been more, I think, in the education scenario. So I think education pushes a lot Google, and I know Microsoft is really pushing into that vertical.
Mhm.
But Google still seems to have the most market, I would think, in the education sphere. And so when we see that kind of backwards migration, it's more in an educational sense. But most of the time, it's people coming from Google going towards Microsoft just to get the extra productivity stuff. And a big thing is local apps, having a local Teams app and local OneDrive and stuff like that. Instead of just being all cloud, they need that interconnectivity. Like they don't want to have to connect to a browser or things like that. And the extra compliance components and things like that we have available on Office 365 really make it the forefront. We also sell G Suite. I don't have anything against them. I just personally, and a lot of people agree with me, find that Microsoft is the better of the two. But I mean, Google's great too, and we can offer it, and we can migrate you onto it or off of it.
Perfect.
So, Alex, I guess nobody has any questions.
Yeah, I think you guys covered pretty much everything here. So we'll give 10 minutes back to everybody else, I guess.
Perfect. Then I just want to take the opportunity to thank Kelsey for joining me. Very much appreciate having you on the webinar with us to discuss the product and stuff. I hope that it's been informative for everybody that joined, and to anybody that might watch this on our YouTube channel later.
Yeah, thanks, James. Thanks for having us, and thanks for letting us tell the BitTitan story.
That's our pleasure, and thanks for being there and a great partner of us.